Good evening, and good evening, tribe, and welcome back to Energy in Motion. We're going to have an awesome show tonight, and I'm just so excited to be back here with
Rah,
you.
we have a call on the line.
So we're recording. Does the studio have a call, or do I have a call?
Energy in Motion has a call on the line. You want me to put them through?
We never get called. Yeah, I want you to put them through. Hold on. Hello.
Tell them our name. They don't care how excited you are until they know who we are.
Of course. She really want to do this right now. Okay. Let's try this again. Good evening and welcome to Energy in Motion. My name is Rah Kalon, and this is our episode on ego. And the beautiful, melodic, yet obnoxious voice that you are hearing right now happens to be mine.
Melodic indeed. It is nice to properly meet you all. She keeps me on such a short leash as of late, but I'm so excited about having a whole radio show to myself.
Wait now. You not to yourself, okay? We talked about this. It can't all be about you. Is it all about you?
Essentially. Tell me one episode that was not about me.
Well,
Feeling safe? Me.
maybe.
Feeling insecure?
Well, yeah.
Me.
What about worth?
Feeling worthy? So me.
Okay, all right. And I won't even disagree with you there because all of the topics do in some way boil down to being all about you. But can't we agree it's also kind of about all of us? I mean, this show doesn't make us an island. In fact, it's supposed to give us a platform to communicate with other people and their egos, big and small, so that we can learn the origin of you and what you as an ego need. And so that we can all kind of get on the same page of it being about us. Because in the beginning, just like in the end, it's not a you and they and them. It's a we. It's a usness. It's about oneness, you know?
Wow. Wow.
Okay.
You know what? You, girl,
You get it?
you really are gay. Like, you real gay. Don't even try to Rah Kalon.
I wasn't trying to.
I am Rah Kalon. You tried it. You tried it.
It was worth a try. It was.
But I'm a level with you. Because I don't disagree with you.
Really?
I know I can come off arrogant and mischievous even.
Yes.
But I'm really given a bad rap, and I know you know that. I literally was created from you for you, so you could even navigate this world as prepared and maybe, yes, guarded, but still prepared as possible.
Yeah.
I know I get in the way. I do. I know that, but it's just because I get concerned about you. Hell, I get concerned about us.
Don't you know I know that, though? I do. I used to get so concerned about us, and I still do, thanks to you. But in the beginning, I needed you so much, you know? Like, I depended on you so heavily. But now I'm trying to do some different stuff, you know? I'm trying to be on that hippie shit, that hippie stuff. I'm trying to elevate myself to a higher level so that you, if at all possible, can relax. And so that I can stop looking like an asshole.
I mean, I wouldn't call it you looking like an asshole.
What would you call it?
I would say you just look assertive. No, you do. You do end up looking like an asshole.
Exactly.
That's my bad.
Yeah.
Okay. I do. I get what you're saying. So are you really saying that you're good and that we're good?
Yes. I'm good. You're good, I hope. We're good. This isn't about needing to have the whole like ego death thing. I'm not even trying to get rid of you, you know? Like I value you, I do. But I just need you to stay in your damn lane, you know? Like I just need you to let me do this. Let me live. So first off, can I host the show? Can I host this show?
You goddamn right you can host this show.
Thank you.
Girl. We are gonna be okay. And I know, you may not need me, all right?
Okay.
But if you ever want me, I got your back.
Oh, look who's being gay now. All right, I'll talk about it later. Okay, love you, bye. Hang up on her. Hang up so that she doesn't. She's already hung up. Okay. So, Welcome to Energy in Motion. As awkward but necessary as a conversation as that was, I don't think there's a better segue into talking about our lovely topic of the night. And I do want to flatter it. I want to boost it up because it is all about the incorrigible ego, which I prefer to call my extraordinary ego. So we're tonight going to be going through a whole bunch of different things regarding the whole topic. However, I want to make sure that if you have not been able to see all the sweet nothings I've been whispering to you all about the imaginary friend, the ego, please make sure that you follow us on Instagram so that you can be a part of that conversation. So make sure that you're checking in. That handle is the number 3, the letter N, the word motion. That's 3NMOTION. So we're not just going to talk about my experience with ego. I have told you many a time on this show, I'm a bit of a big nerd, and I like to do research on these things. I love to do research on emotional intelligence, on the human brain, on consciousness, all of it. So I just went into my records, and I found different articles that specifically pertain to this topic. And so I want us to first off, as usual, define what is ego in the first place. So ego, according to beautiful Santiago Martinez, is the personality created from the combination of all the beliefs stored in your mind, which, of course, can change over time, transforming your personality in the same way. So your egos are genuinely just a combination of all of your beliefs, all of your experiences bottled up and put into one personified location. And the reason why the ego seems to be so all-knowing and hard to separate ourselves from is because it's literally pulling directly from us. Think about the ads that are formatted for you on your cell phone or on the things that you watch or the apps you use. They seem formatted just for you, right? It's because it's constantly watching and taking in all the stuff that you're watching and you're taking in, and it's formulating the opinions based off of what your belief system is. It's kind of how the ego works too. It knows what you just saw. It knows your insecurities. It told you why you should have those insecurities in the first place. So if we scroll down a little bit and talk about Matilda Faltyn, she says that the ego is the habitual thoughts and fear-based emotions that occupy a person's conscious waking time. It holds the intellect, habits, spectrums of baser emotions, and impulses and instincts. Its basic ingredient is fear in all fear's subtle forms, and it has disconnected us from the source of all things. Whether you call that God or the universe, whomever you're speaking of, it's disconnected you from the source of all of those things. It's also referred to as the lower self. And a lot of people don't like the term lower self as if, you're creating duality right then and there when you talk about lower self and higher self. However, life is about balance, correct? You've seen me using the symbol of the yin and yang on Instagram because it is about the duality, because we in some way actually do need to value our egos, but at the same time we do need to keep it in check. And so we need to be prepared to recognize it for what it is and to identify it as that. So ego forces thinking on the mind when the mind wants to be still. I want us to think about that. Ego forces thinking on the mind when the mind wants to be still. Think about how uncomfortable you get when you feel like there's something you should be doing, but there's nothing like at the front of your mind you should actively be doing. You know how unsettling that is? Why is it that we can't just enjoy that present moment where there's nothing to do? Why is it that we always assume that we need to be somewhere, be doing something, helping someone? Other than the fact that, we might be servant people. It's the ego. The ego constantly needs to be in control, and it almost bullies you into knowing it's real or thinking it's real by making sure you are always thinking in the first place. We are feeling beings, and those feelings get translated into thoughts so that the ego has something to feed on and to prey on and then to throw back at you. But the ego can be used as a weapon, or the ego can be used as a stepping stone. It's completely up to us as to how we approach it. So if we think about growing up, what did we hear about growing up, or what did we hear about egos when we were growing up? The main thing that I've heard so far is I heard to make sure you check your ego at the door. I heard to make sure you don't have a big ego. So already from that, and a lot of these comments actually came from men, to check your ego, because I think we live in a society that is a lot more comfortable with men demonstrating, being prideful, being boastful, and that's just obviously traits that women aren't allowed to have. So even though my ego loves to talk about how, you're just being assertive, oftentimes people will call me an asshole because I can be very confident, and while I am humble, if that at all comes off as arrogance, as a woman, that's a difficult thing for people to handle. So when men were writing in and telling me specifically that I was raised to check my ego, I was raised to make sure that my ego, I left it at the door when I came into business, when I came into this or that. It's interesting because if no one really taught you your ego's relationship to you, how are you even supposed to know how to separate yourself from it? Because you automatically assume that you are your ego. It has a lot of the same thoughts, if not the same thoughts and beliefs as the majority of you, not all of you. There is a portion of you that knows all too well that the stuff that the ego tries to throw in your face is all fake. It's all false. None of it is real. But we have to wake up in order to be able to understand that and to handle that truth. It gives us a lot of responsibility, but it also can provide a lot of freedom. It just depends on how you want to look at it. And so that leads us to kind of talking about, is the ego good or bad? So we just mentioned duality. And I also, I'll share a belief of mine, I don't necessarily believe in the idea of good or bad. I think my scope is too limited to be able to determine if something is good or bad for everybody. I can maybe determine that on a personal basis, subjectively for me, but even then I have to be honest with myself about the scope that I have. I have experienced some things, not everything. I can't say that I know that all people who treat me like this are negative. I can't say that all people that present in that way are positive. I can't. But my ego, my mind wanting to be able to categorize things would like to lead me to believe that I can, and that would cut me out of so many different experiences, so many new chances and opportunities if I allowed myself to think I know it all. The ego wants to pretend to know it all, so we will look to the ego so that the ego can stay alive and well. It is our looking to the ego that keeps it so prevalent. If we didn't turn to it and ask for so much advice, it wouldn't try to tell us what to do all the time. So if we're talking a little bit about where did it even come from, there are a couple of different ideas in a couple of places. Most of us, when we hear about ego, we think of Sigmund Freud. We will get to what Freud thinks in a moment. I don't want to highlight Freud too much because if you know anything about psychoanalytics, Freud is not the person, even though he's a founder, he is not the person you necessarily want to listen to, especially if you are a person of color or a woman. His ideas can not only be offensive, but just quite downright insane sometimes. But he did present some interesting discussion topics about it. So before we get to Freud's thought, let's talk about pre-ego theory. Pre-ego. Y'all see how nerdy I'm getting? Just roll with me here. Pre-ego theory. So there's this wonderful author. I hope y'all have heard of him, Eckhart Tolle. He is awesome. And he was talking in one of his conversations that I saw on YouTube about pre-ego. So it's this idea that back in the Golden Age, which is referenced in the Old Testament, that apparently this was a time that people were able to navigate the world and live in harmony with nature and with one another. Let's see, what did I jot down note-wise? So people lived in harmony with nature and one another based off their natural connection to source energy or God. It is said we had not yet developed egos. It is theorized that like so many other tools and traits that evolved with us, we developed egos as a way to further help govern ourselves. Initially, it was just utilized as a simple tool to help us navigate away from pain and towards fulfillment. But like every major innovation, we as human beings became codependent upon it to the point where we now have trouble distinguishing the ego from ourselves. This theory goes on to further say that with this current shift of consciousness we are moving into right now, we are likely evolving out of a time of relying so dependently on the ego and maybe even into a future where we no longer utilize it at all. So like, mind blown, right? So when I heard this, I was like, first off, I'll be honest, talk of there being a time before an ego made me very uncomfortable. And then I had to sit and look at my ego and be like, I'm not uncomfortable, you're uncomfortable. Because any conversation about the ego not existing at some point gets the ego real shook, real fast. Because it already knows its time is limited. It's not even supposed to be here. It's sitting on borrowed time. So it doesn't want to hear conversations about a time, a golden age where it was not running rampant. But it made me uncomfortable at first because of my ego. But when I thought about it more, it's like, I do think that there's a possibility that there was a time before, when it was the golden age and all of that, when people could live in harmony. I do believe that existed. I just can't imagine what that looks like. And that is a true testament to how prevalent the ego is. To the point that now we don't even know how we would navigate without it. To the point where I would doubt that that time could even exist just because of how each and every one of us are navigating the world so heavily with our ego now. So then I started thinking about the ego as if it's like technology or a cell phone. when my parents or my dad would say, I didn't have a phone. We would just walk down the street to see if someone was there, if they were at home, if you couldn't call them. It's like, how inconvenient that is. How did you know how to do this? How did you conveniently do that? How was that effective at all? But there was a time before cell phones. There was a time that there was just house phones, and then there was a time that there were no phones at all, and people were still communicating. So for the students that I work with, the kids in my life, they could not fathom a time without internet or social media because of how convenient it's made things. Think about studying. Think about how people used to spend days, weeks, months in the library, only being able to get that information from books, right? And now you don't even need a laptop. You could do most of your studying on your phone. You could download your books on your phone. So they're going to grow up to be a whole bunch of people who don't even understand what life would have been like without technology. However, people still lived joyous, happy lives back then, right? And I'm thinking the ego's kind of like that. I'm thinking we've gotten far enough along that we forgot what it was like to operate specifically in harmony off of source energy, off of that original energy. And it was so conditioned in us to move in that feeling of that instinct of harmony that we didn't even know the privilege we had to not have the ego kind of just being on our shoulder, being on our back. And so then we moved into developing an ego, and we knew how frustrating it was to have it, but we also knew how valuable it was too. And I think now we're having so many conversations these days about how the ego is almost, we talk about it as if it's absurd to have, like it's harmful and it's negative and it burdens us. We talk so negatively about it, but yet we still are operating through it, through its lens. Like those are the goggles we're looking at the world. And we forget that we actually have control over that. So that's the pre-ego theory. Dope, right? Even if you don't believe it. Like I said, it took me a second to buy into it or even to truly consider it. But I realized it was important to kind of realize. Hold on real quick. Engineer, I'm getting a little feedback on my headphones. Can you hear that too?
I hear some humming. All day.
Mm-hmm. Is it going to be on the... Oh, yeah, we're going to turn that off. We're experiencing some technical difficulties. You can't imagine how there's ringing in my ears right now. It's gone now. Thank you. Thank you, team. I appreciate you. I get stressed, but it helps to have help. But if we're talking about the ego and if we talked about where it originally might have stirred up and started to come from, if we also then consider the purpose of the ego, like why is it actually here? We have a couple of different options. So a wonderful man named Mark Epstein, he had spoke about the ego likes certainty, security, and repetition. Its purpose is essentially to help us. So the ego likes certainty, security, and repetition. Essentially, it just wants to make sure that you aren't coming up against something you can't handle. Now, the ego is something that can get you real hyped up, real, feeling real boosted, right? Or it can also be the thing that can make you feel pretty low. I remember the main song that comes to mind is Beyonce's Ego, right? It's too big, it's too wide, it's too strong, it won't fit, all of the things. But it was seen as a positive. She was celebrating that, right? And that was a wonderful opportunity to see a woman celebrating having an ego and what that does for her, because it sounds liberating if you can get your ego under control. The reason why the purpose of it matters is because it is a tool. A lot of people want to talk about having ego deaths or getting rid of the ego, and I think it's because they misunderstand it. The ego, as we're going to talk a little bit more about later, really is what helps us to navigate the world and to be able to have the human part of the human being experience. Of course, as many of you hippie people have already heard, we are not physical beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. We couldn't have the human experience without the ego kind of being in there to navigate. The ego is what anchors the feelings. They're what carries those beliefs and those feelings all together so that we can have consistent thoughts, have consistent ways of thinking and value systems. It's all tied to the ego in that sense. And so that's why there can be a lot of conflict and a lot of contrast in the world, because we have differing views, because each ego is subjective, each ego is looking out for itself, and it's also each ego is probably perceiving things from a perspective of lack. And so it's always trying to hold on to what it does have and make sure it doesn't lose anything else. And that's not a conducive environment for the oneness and the we that actually exists, that is actually real. There is no separation between us. We are one as hippy dippy and as cheesy as that sounds, as hard as that pill is to swallow, that you are one with the person you hate the most, the reason you hate them the most is because some part of you is connected to them. And you're probably that frustrated because it's almost like a sibling annoyance. You are connected to them. We all are a part of this together. So we will go ahead and talk about kind of what Freud says the purpose of the ego is. We'll give him a little brief moment of shine. So according to Freud's model of the psyche, the id, because we're talking about Freud's model, which involves the id, the ego, and the superego. So the id is the primitive and instinctual part of the mind that contains sexual and aggressive drives and hidden memories. The superego operates as a moral conscience, and the ego, what we're talking about, is the realistic part that mediates between the desires of the id and the superego. So essentially, in Freud's opinion, you got this crazy Tasmanian devil, like baby in you, because the id never grows up. The id is the same instincts that you had when you were born. It never matures with you. So we have that in us sitting on one shoulder, right? And then we have the superego on the opposite shoulder. So it's almost like the devil-angel analogy. But the superego ain't no angel. The superego is an asshole. Let's just call it for what it is. The superego is kind of the voice that you develop based off whoever your disciplinarian was in your life growing up. So your inner voice essentially is the superego. The person or the voice that tells you what you should be doing, or you shouldn't have done that, or you should feel guilty, or you know better. That's the superego. And I'm not saying that we don't need a little bit of that guidance, but I am saying the superego finds some really petty ways of letting us know we've messed up. And so then we're left with the ego, which Freud really says that's where most of us spend most of our time, is living within the ego. However, that's where Freud messes up. I'm not doubting that most of us spend our time living in the ego, but he acted as if there was no other part to us other than the ego. He was not aware of the higher self. And that makes sense because his life spiraled pretty tragically. Still, he's a part of us. He is part of the oneness. Crazy old Freud is part of the oneness. But it doesn't change the fact that we have to acknowledge that there might be some animalistic, primitive, like aggressive sexual instincts in us. Yeah, because we are animals. Human beings are animals. We have that in us. But also the superego is not a good representation of the guidance of the source that I'm aware of. I wonder, and please feel free to write in, if the superego or the voice in your head that often pumps out so much of that negative self-talk reminds you of, one, anyone you grew up with. And if you grew up with someone that talked to you that horribly, I'm sorry. I am so sorry, and you deserve so much better, and I hope you're at a point now where you will allow better to come in. But the superego is just full of shit. It's not real. It's not true how it talks to us. The guidance it's trying to direct us to might be. We got to check in with our belief system to see if that's really the case. But it's not the way that you deserve to be spoken to. And so from Freud's perspective, if that's the case, if it's the superego or the id that you have to choose from, the ego in and of itself is probably going to be pretty chaotic and insane. You don't really got good advice coming from either shoulder here, right? However, that's why Freud's theories kind of have to be taken with a grain of salt, because there is no closure with a Freud theory. You just kind of take it for what it is. But I like closure. So I wrote a little something in regards to that. I put, ego, it's simply the personification of your belief system. It can be those collective beliefs that empower you to take a life-changing risk, or it could be those same beliefs that lead to your demise due to pride and greed. The ego, by nature, operates off a mindset of lack, so it is always going to have a limited perspective. And that, in some capacity, is why we have to find a way to find the tool that ego is for us in our lives individually and use it as that. Because once we can do that, that's why we should be able to appreciate the ego, as it is the spice of life and it is what allows us to experience the colorful range of emotional and physical sensations that come with the human experience. So, not to discredit you, Freud, too much, but I've experienced far too much to think that it is just my animalistic instincts and what I should and shouldn't be doing according to the superego that is what balances out the ego in me and how I operate. Fortunately, due to the intervening of a higher self, I know that there's more to me. And so I'll take a moment to specifically share how I learned so much more about having a healthy relationship with my ego. This time last year, this time last year, me and Chelsea had gone to Iquitos, Peru. And we specifically went for the experience of going to a shaman retreat, where we were going to be able to have a very holistic, authentic, real, in the middle of the Amazon experience, of kind of just coming home to ourselves. And so Chelsea told me about ayahuasca earlier in the year. I had lost a family member. I had all these struggles with my own career at the time. My dog went missing with my car. There was a lot of shit popping off that at the beginning of last year. And so hearing about being able to go to this retreat where they had ayahuasca ceremonies, I was very interested. But I didn't even know exactly what am I going for? What am I asking for? And so as we got closer to August throughout the remaining of the year, I started to really think what do I want to learn? What do I want? And with the research I was doing, had learned a little bit more about ego, but from the slanted perspective of people who also didn't know the value of it. They just were talking about the burden of ego. And I was like, well, my ego really does get in the way sometimes too. And it has me looking dumb and mean and unnecessarily I think I need to shed my ego. So the 3 things that I went to this retreat wanting to do was 1, shed my ego, 2, get closer to my higher self, and 3, fully grieve my mother. I had watched many a YouTube video talking about someone going through an ayahuasca experience and being able to connect with a deceased loved one. I'd seen them really have experiences of closure or seeing the bigger picture as to why these things happened. And I'll explain what ayahuasca is in a second so you can understand how does this retreat even offer those things. So ayahuasca is a ceremonial tea. Drank in the Amazon and other specific places, and it is part of rituals and ceremonies that they do. It was usually for the shamans only, or for the wise people in the village to be able to prophesize to others. Or if someone was mentally ill, or if someone needed guidance, they would be allowed to drink the ayahuasca tea, which is completely all natural. It comes from the ground, from a mixture of specific leaves and roots mixed together that creates a psychedelic effect or a hallucinogenic. So we go for this experience, and I have my biggest breakthrough of experiences on the final day of us doing ceremonies. There are 3 ceremonies that occur. And one of the funny things is when me and Chelsea were planning this trip and everything, we had said, the ironic thing will be to go all the way to Peru just to find out that, you didn't need to go anywhere in the first place to have all the answers. And we cackled and we laughed and ha ha ha. And it's what if we don't even see anything? The answers are inside of us. Ha 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 ha. So the first 2 ceremonies that we were there, essentially that is the answer we got. We were in a beautiful, beautiful Amazonian place amongst people who were having these trippy experiences, and I was laying on a mat for 5 hours crying to myself because I finally was getting to sit with myself. Not sit with myself and all my thoughts, but sit with myself in silence and to be left alone by the ego. And you don't know how quiet your mind is when your ego is not talking. So while I wasn't seeing anything crazy, I was very aware that this was an experience. This was an honor. To have that type of silence, it reassured me there is more to me than what this ego, what this brain always is running and trying to convince me of. And so that was the first experience, the first ceremony. That's what it taught me. And it also taught me that I wasn't meant to go looking for my mother. I did not have a need to look for her. I was almost, without words at all, introduced to the idea of this time is for you. I could bring you memories of her. I could introduce you to her again. I could let you experience her now. But that will distract you further from you. You are always looking for something when everything you need is right here. And so that also, in that first ceremony, validated getting closer to my higher self and my need to grieve my mother. Because it was you don't have to grieve as in leave it all here, because that's what I came to do. I came to leave it all there. And it was do you actually want to leave her all here, or do you want to take the part of her that will always be alive with you? And it's I want to do that. It's okay. And so that was my first experience. My second experience was having fun with myself. just sitting there listening to the music, listening to the native drums, listening to the guitar being played. It was a safe environment, even though I was in the middle of the Amazon. In a netted, is it a tumbo? I think it's a tumbo. We were just out there. No air conditioning. Electricity was only on a couple hours a day. They ran out of filtered water at some point. There was no ice. What is ice? What? It was so authentic, and I was having so much fun in the middle of nowhere with myself. I didn't need any distractions. I was just content with me. And it gave me an opportunity to worry about someone else. At one point, I looked up and Chelsea was no longer in the little cot next to me. And I was like, well, shit, this is not the place to lose your bestie. Like, this is not the place to do that. But it asked me, it said, am I enough? And when I say it, we'll call it Mama Ayahuasca. We'll call it, my inner self. We'll call it my higher self. It asked me, am I enough? I also protect her too. So who made you in charge of looking after her? Be with me. And I remember laying there and being like, every ride or die best friend instinct in me, all ego, of course, tells me to get up and run into the forest and look for this woman. Or run into the jungle, really. And then I laid back down. I did not listen to those instincts. I did not listen to the rattling and the yelling of the ego. I listened to the higher self. And I laid down, and I didn't hear anything. All I could feel was that it and I were pleased with that decision. It was like, finally. Like, it didn't say it. It wasn't anything like that. It just was a feeling of finally. And little did I know, a couple minutes later, I thought I was finally like tripping balls because there was a shadow in the distance standing, like, because it was completely black, just pitch black. It's a 5-hour-long ceremony. We're about 3 hours into this second ceremony at this point. And I see the shadow coming towards me, and then the shadow gets on the floor because the cots are on the floor and crawls over to me, and I'm like, this is when I give it all up. This is when I just surrender and just pass out. And it wasn't anything scary. It wasn't, of course, anything scary because I heard a sweet voice say, "You want to go take a walk?" And it was Chelsea. And so the thing that I was giving the opportunity to be so distracted by, the thing that I was given the opportunity to be so afraid of needing to do something about, the thing that the ego was using as bait to get me out of this Zen place was delivered directly to me in the sweetest of ways, as long as I was willing to be with me. If I got to put me first, then I would get everything else I needed. And when I say put me first, I'm saying put my higher self first. Because the ego, which also likes to consider itself me, was asking me to put it first. And most days I say yes to it. And since I didn't say yes that day, I truly felt delivered. So then 2 days go by and we do our final ceremony. And they allow us to do our ceremony in our specific cots or huts where we sleep. Because previously, we as a group, all the people in the retreat would get together in the tumbo and go out and do the ayahuasca. But in this last ceremony, not only did we get to do it just in our specific hut, we got to do it in the daytime. All the other ceremonies were in the nighttime. So this involved like sunshine, all the tropical birds, all the sounds, all the everything. So this first experience during this final ceremony, I call Big Me, Little Me. And I had been having some anxiety because at the time there were a lot of things that were going to change when I got back home to the States. I knew I was done with grad school. I knew there were going to be changes at my 9 to 5. And I knew that even like my best friend's schedule, she was going to go to grad school. So there wasn't going to be the same level of hanging out or the support system. Everything was shifting, and that had me really anxious. And so we had taken the ayahuasca. The shaman had blessed us, and he had left us in privacy. And taking ayahuasca, doing ayahuasca, drinking ayahuasca, let me clarify. It is not fun. This is not a fun thing. This is not I want to go trip balls, so I'm going to go drink ayahuasca. No. It's not a casual thing. It's not a thing to be played with or to be taken lightly. It is a life-changing thing. It is natural, so you're not afraid of what your body is doing, but it's a very spiritual experience. And so you're much more concerned with your inside's well-beings. So Chelsea had actually gone kind of out, not for a walk necessarily, but just to get some air once she had taken her ayahuasca. And I was laying there and I started thinking about how afraid I was and how afraid of being alone I was and how I ached for the fact that change was inevitable and all these very human-like feelings. And the reason why it was so overwhelming at that specific moment was because that week I had been delivered, right? I had chosen to be with myself. I knew what that was like. I knew what that felt like. So to be back in my old mindset felt like wearing clothes that were too small, but I felt it very real. It was a heavy weight, feeling that loneliness, feeling that fear. And then I got this vision. And these were the first visions I got the whole time, because you're supposed to be having like blasting off into outer space when you're on ayahuasca. The people who were a part of the rest of the retreat were talking about, oh, I turned into a jaguar at one point and I could see, all these yards ahead of me and I could hear things that were, across the lake and all these different things. And I was like, I laid with myself and I felt delivered. It doesn't sound as cool as their stuff. So for me during this experience to start having a vision, that was a big effing deal. So the vision was simple. The vision was me standing in front of Chelsea, and I put my forehead on her forehead. Real gay, right? We weren't even together then. We just always been this gay. And then it changed. The vision changed almost like the light, because there was sunshine shining in the background of this vision. The sunshine got too bright, and me and Chelsea went out of focus. And then we came back into focus, but Chelsea wasn't there anymore. It was just me and me. It was a big me, like a 6-foot-something me. I'm already 5'10". I'm a tall woman. It was a 6-foot-something me, and normal size me, but normal size me looked so small. It looked as small as I felt. And normal size me was just sobbing, just convulsing, just sobbing. And big me had her forehead on my forehead, just smiling, just beaming joy at me, as if she could tell and she knew, I know all the things you're afraid of, and all of those things aren't real, but I'm willing to be patient with you while you figure out that it's not real. And you think you need Chelsea here, or you think you need your dad here, or you think you need this here. You don't need those things. All you need is my big self, and I'm not going anywhere. And that was the sentiment. There were no words. There weren't words in any of the things that I experienced. And it's so funny. I'm a wordsmith. I love words. I'm great with them. But I didn't need words because I was feeling it. And I have to thank my ego for that, because my ego provides the vehicle for me to feel. And so that feeling of that peace is so, so needed. And so when I experienced that first vision of big me and little me, it changed the game. It changed the game. And so I stopped feeling that fear of the loneliness. And then that only left one thing for me to deal with on this ayahuasca experience, right? The ego. I'd almost forgotten about it. I wasn't directly thinking about it. I wasn't so in touch with it at this point. So the final vision I had, because it was an awesome vision, was a pristine white bathroom. So follow me here. It was a pristine white bathroom. White walls, white ceiling, white sink. There was an old school white Victorian tub. The type that has the legs on it, And it wasn't actually hooked up to any plumbing that attached to like the floor or the wall or anything. It was just kind of sitting in the middle of this room. And it did have a faucet. And the faucet, after my vision or perspective panned the room just to show off how pristine it was, how perfect it was, the faucet turns on and there starts to be all these psychedelic colors, all these neon colors filling this pristine white tub. And I can feel inside of me this anxiety over, oh, this room is so clean, this room is so nice, all these colors, I hope they don't spill anywhere, I hope they just stay in the tub. I really don't want the tub messed up, but if they have to be somewhere, let's just keep it in the tub. And so the colors keep filling and they're swirling, and it's beautiful, right? It's beautiful, blues and yellows and pinks and purples and greens. And then the tub gets full and it doesn't stop. And then slowly it starts to overflow through 2 spouts at the very tip or the side of the Victorian tub, and it starts to pour onto the floor. And oh, my anxiety's going. Oh, my anxiety. I'm like, who gonna clean this up? What is happening? Why is this happening? And then I look at the swirled pool of colors that are gathering on the floor, and I see 2 eyes look back at me. I see the top of a head start to rise out of this puddle of psychedelic colors on the floor. And it only comes up to this point. All I can see is its eyes, eyebrows, top of its head. And she, and because it felt like a she, looked familiar. And I slowly see her hands kind of rise out of the rest of the puddle, and she's wiggling her fingers and she's doing all this. And she looks around the room and she sees whatever lens I'm looking through, camera, whatever perspective I'm using. She sees me seeing her. And I can see her almost smile. Like I can't see her mouth. I only see from here up. But you know how Tyra Banks told to smile with your eyes? Well, that thing smiled with its eyes. And it wasn't an evil smile, but it wasn't a friendly smile either. The best word I can use for that smile is mischievous. It was a mischievous smile. And then it ducked back down. It pushed its arms higher up. And these psychedelic, colorful arms start swirling and getting paint everywhere. Colors are going everywhere. And then I wake up from this vision. I wasn't really unconscious, but I come to, right? And I'm like, what the fuck was that about? Didn't understand it. And it wasn't until we were sharing with the rest of our retreat brethren at the end that I was given the insight from the shaman. I was given the insight from my higher self of, you asked about ego. You asked about ego's place in your life. And he asked, like, how did her eyes look specifically? And I told him, he's like, did they look evil? Did they look mean? I was like, they didn't look evil and they didn't look mean. They just looked like trouble. That's how I described it. I said, she looked like trouble. And that is my ego. That is when I actually got a personified, not even personified, but a visual, physical look at what she looks like. And my life, essentially, I was living it as if it was this pristine bathroom that I didn't want my ego to touch at all. How dare she? But if I actually took a moment to see, I don't want to be so anxious. I don't want to be caught up in things having to be perfect. I want there to be room for there to be color. I want there to be life in my life. But there needs to be a specific place where it's appropriate. There needs to be a place that I can safely share this colorfulness and also not have to deal with it too. There needs to be balance. And so I realized that after that final ceremony, I had gotten my answers. I had gotten the reason that I had come to do the ayahuasca experience in the first place. I had learned you don't need to grieve your mother and leave her here. You need to celebrate your mother and continue to take her with you. You don't need some hooping and hollering time where you just cry obsessively and then that's it and you won't cry anymore. No, you're going to cry. You're going to cry on and off, and that's okay because you're going to laugh on and off about her too. You're going to smile on and off about her too. And then I got the second answer of getting closer to my higher self. I absolutely did. I tell you, it sounds so simple, but sitting in silence, which is something that would make most of us very anxious. Think about all of you who can't go to sleep without the TV on or even the ceiling fan on. So many of us grew up air conditioned. Something has to be running. I have to hear either a noise, white noise, or a voice in the background because we just can't deal with the silence because it seems so foreign. Maybe it seems so foreign because that is where truth lies. Maybe the ego has to keep talking to keep you distracted because if it got quiet just long enough, all it did was be quiet for 1 5-hour ceremony and I felt delivered. 5 hours of silence in that way, or 5 hours of just being comfortable with me in my head in that way. If we could consistently get into a meditative state or just a calm state and experience that on a daily basis, we would start to chip away at the power that the ego has. The ego only has this power because we keep looking to it and offering it our attention. And I know that sounds so cheesy. It's like, no, it's not that easy. But it is. If we stop looking to it in such a, I expect my ego to be here, I expect that it has the answers way, it'll stop being there and it'll stop having the answers. Because the answers it's giving you ain't good. It ain't. Not always. Not always. So we want to talk a little bit about kind of how to befriend the ego as we come to a close on this specific show. So before we take a beat, before we do, back there. This was also written by Mr. Martinez, Santiago Martinez. And all these articles that I'm reading from, I went to grad school. I know the importance of citing. You will be able to find these things because I don't want to share. I don't want to hide the knowledge. I want to share it. I want to get it out there. So you will find all the articles to these things in the description below. So it's written by Santiago Martinez. The ego was born to survive and to suffer. The soul to play and understand. The ego is the mind and the soul the ego is the mind and the soul is all consciousness. The mind is a computer and the soul has the option to control it. Beliefs can be disproved once the soul takes control through the observation of the mind. This happens upon reflecting on the fact that the soul is not the mind. The soul is not the mind. The soul is not the mind. The mind is a computer and the soul has the option to control it. Keep that in mind. Just remember that, okay? When it feels like your thoughts are getting away from you, they're getting the best of you, it's because they are not you and you're being bullied by them. But they only have the power that you give them. It's almost like the boogeyman or the imaginary friend you might have had growing up. It's only as empowering or as impactful as you empower it to be. And it really desperately wants your attention, but you get to choose if you give it to it. And you get to make that choice. And so we're going to go ahead and go to our Take a Beat moment. This Take a Beat moment is going to be brought to us by Fractal Enlightenment's author, Nikki Sapp, and her article is called Using Ego to Your Advantage. Using Ego to Your Advantage. So it goes like this. To a certain extent, we need ego to exist in this physical dimension and plane. Without it, we would never get to experience the feeling of being a person, of meeting others, of being sad, angry, of falling in love. The illusion of ego is necessary in order to play this little game of life we have going on. However, technically, the ego doesn't actually exist. It's completely dependent on our belief in it in order to be something or anything. But before we jump on the death to ego bandwagon, we must recognize that without any ego, we don't get to take part in any of this. And before we go trying to kill it and fight with it, we must also come to terms with the fact that you can't kill something that isn't even real. The mere desire of wanting to get rid of something stems from the belief that the thing you are trying to get rid of actually exists. So on one hand, we have the fact that a certain amount of ego is necessary in order to participate in life. And on the other hand, we have the issue that the ego causes us suffering. It causes us to buy into beliefs about ourselves or about others that aren't true and limit our experience of the world. Also, it feeds a fear, complaints, worry, and problems. So now we have to learn how to balance between the two. How do we surrender to the necessary parts of our ego, the ones that we need in order to experience life, while at the same time not buying into the fear-based belief systems and attachments that our egos have tried to build into us? So it's important to first remember that ego's worst fear is being found out, so to speak at least. The minute we shine the light of our awareness on it, it's like turning on the light in a dark room. It's almost like seeing a ghost maybe, only to find that there was in fact nothing there at all. This is actually and exactly how the ego works. People spend years believing in all the stories it is creating about reality, only to later find out it was all a lie. We could have literally decided to believe or not believe or create even any story we wanted to about our lives. But the ego does not want us to know that. It's masquerading us as if we are the ego and the ego is us, causing us to think that we are the ones generating the ideas and beliefs in our minds, but in actuality, we are the awareness that is behind the thoughts and ideas. This is the most important thing we must realize when becoming masters of the ego. Once we come to terms with the fact that this is not us, we can start identifying where our ego is causing suffering in our lives from a place of presence rather than identification. From this level of presence, we can observe the ego without judging it and without fighting with it, which is exactly what the ego does not want. The minute we accept it, it can no longer fight with us. We simply recognize that it is trying to feed us a story and observe the story rather than believing or feeding into it. In this pure observation rather than belief, we transcend the fear or problem the ego is begging us to believe in. And it is at this point that we start running the show. We decide when we can use our ego to our advantage, meaning when our ego is giving us a belief that will cause us happiness, and when the ego is giving us something that will cause us more suffering. And it's this acceptance that helps us be better equipped to control our thoughts and ideas. Making your ego your slave instead of your master is a process that wouldn't happen overnight. The ego has a tricky way of creeping back in ever so often, pretending to be real and true. The more we start operating out of the present moment, we are then able to create space in between our thoughts. This space becomes the foundation in which we are able to take back control of our own psyches. Do not fight with your ego. Do not try to get rid of it or kill it. Surrender to it. Make friends with it. Observe its nuances, and when you begin to recognize a thought pattern that is starting to cause more suffering than you would like, simply observe it without believing in it. The ego is feeding off belief, and wherever the belief is placed is exactly the energy that will be amplified. Think of the ego as your imaginary friend. Use it to your advantage when you need it, but the minute it starts to limit you or anchor you in fear, turn the tables on it by shining the light of your consciousness. At this point, you can finally get a good laugh at it and say to yourself, silly me, for a minute, ego, I actually believed you were real. So, with that being the case, I want to make sure that we all have a true understanding of the fact that the ego is a tool. It is a tool that you can choose to use. It is not you creating all these thoughts. It is you operating off of a lot of beliefs that are stored up in you. But the ego could be a weapon used against you, or the ego could actually be a stepping stone used to benefit and bless you. Think about how the ego can hype you up and get you to take those positive risks, those beautiful things that you thought, maybe I shouldn't, maybe I couldn't, but the ego's like, nah, we got this. Appreciate your ego for that. And when it starts talking negative, talking greedy, talking prideful, getting you into binds, properly, politely, lovingly ask it to let you host your own damn show. So, with that being the case, I want to make sure that I shout out for y'all to check out 50 Shades with Jay. That's on Fridays at 8 o'clock. And I also want to make sure that y'all know to check out our August 29th, our 10th episode of Energy in Motion right here, as always. I'm really excited about it. And there's also some things coming up this fall where you might physically get to meet me, Rah, in person. So you need to stay tuned. And the best way to stay tuned and in the loop is to follow us on Instagram. So let me give you that handle again. It is 3 in Motion. That is the number 3. That is the letter N. That is the word motion. 3NMOTION. So with that being the case, I want to thank you for joining us tonight, me and my extraordinary ego. And as always, you feel what you feel, and you always deserve to heal. Peace.